Number 10. Boca Grande wrecks. About 4 miles, 6.4 kilometers north of Boca Grande Key in Florida, there's a heavily decayed ship sitting in shallow waters, only 5 to 15 feet, 1.5 to 4.6 meters deep. The boat looks much better in photographs from its heyday than it does now. Decades ago, when the hull was more intact, the wreck had mangrove trees growing inside it. But they were wiped out after a hurricane, leaving the site a crumbling heap of metal. It's rumored that the ship used to be Henry Ford's private yacht, called the Ciala, which also went by the names the Patricia Target ship and the Old Patricia Target. Originally known as the USS Coral, the 214-foot, 65 meters yacht was constructed in 1914. Then Henry Ford reportedly bought it during the 1930s, and it was reacquired by the Navy in 1940 to be used in World War II. During the war, the vessel made several naval trips from Philadelphia in June 1941 before sailing to Newport, Rhode Island, just 2 months later. From there, it was used for training purposes in Guantanamo Bay, and then the boat found its final home in the Florida Keys. Sometime after the war, military pilots used the wreck for target practice, leaving it surrounded by dummy bomb casings and dangerous to visit. Number 9. Guerrero. Records indicate that a Spanish slave ship called the Guerrero was a former privateer vessel, originally named the James Monroe, that served in the War of 1812, but its history is mostly shrouded in mystery. During the 1820s, slave trade to Cuba was declared illegal, and that's where the Guerrero mainly did business. In many, if not most cases, ships that transported slaves to Cuba were either destroyed or renamed between runs in order to evade Spanish authorities. The Guerrero was heavily armed too. It spanned 110 feet, 33.6 meters long, with 14 12-pounder guns and a crew of 90 men. The ship was most likely not only involved in the slave trade, but it probably served as a pirate ship. While sailing from Africa to Havana back in December 1827, with 561 African captives aboard, the Guerrero drew the attention of a British anti-slavery patrol ship, HMS Nimble, in the Florida Straits. The Nimble fired some warning shots, signaling that its crew planned to inspect the Guerrero firsthand. But the ship's captain hightailed it instead, sparking a 5-hour-long chase that ended with both ships crashing into a reef off Key Largo. The collision tore into the slave ship's hull and toppled its masts. As the Guerrero sank, 41 of the African captives drowned in the chaos. 20 of the crewmen and 142 of the captives were rescued by a nearby fishing boat called the Florida, which the crew proceeded to hijack and used to sail to Cuba. Several crewmen also hijacked a schooner called the Thorn after getting rescued, and sailed it to Cuba as well, with 246 captive Africans aboard. The captives who made it to shore were sold into slavery, while many of the remaining captives were taken back to Africa. The Diving with a Purpose underwater archaeology program recovers shipwrecks with a focus on African diaspora. They teamed up with the National Park Service and the National Association of Black Scuba Divers to participate in a search for the Guerrero. They eventually located the wreck during their dives between 2010 and 2012 and have recovered an early 19th century cologne bottle, bone china, lead shots, earthenware, metal rigging, copper fasteners, wooden plank fragments, and more from the wreck site. Number 8. Nuestra Señora de Atocha. At least 8 Spanish ships sank in the Florida Keys during a brutal hurricane that took place in 1622. Among them was the heavily armed and heavily laden treasure galleon called the Nuestra Señora de Atocha, which sank with a cargo full of gold, silver, copper, gems, tobacco, and indigo. The loss dealt a severe blow to Spain's economy at the time, forcing the crown to borrow money and sell several of its galleons to fund the country's participation in the 30 Years' War. The Spanish spent 30 years searching for the Atocha, but never found it. An exploration team led by treasure hunters Mel Fisher and Finley Rickard began searching once more for the lost vessel in 1969. In 1973, they found some silver bars from the wreck, as well as gold, emeralds, and more cargo that was believed to be from the Atocha itself. The team found the actual ship 16.5 years later, after searching so long, in 1985. Much of the Atocha's valuable cargo still remains at the wreck. It has an estimated value of nearly $450 million in today's currency, earning it a spot in the Guinness World Records as the most valuable shipwrecks ever found. In July 2021, diver Zach Moore found a rare gold coin from the wreck that carries an estimated value of at least $98,000. It was the 121st coin from the Nuestra Señora de Atocha to be discovered since 2001. Who knows what other treasures lie below the sea's surface? Number 7. Mandalay. Built in 1928, the 112-foot-long, 34 meters schooner Mandalay passed between several hands before getting repurposed as a luxury cruise ship in 1965. It was on its way back to Florida from a 10-day cruise to the Bahamas on New Year's Day in 1966 when it ran aground with 23 passengers and 12 crew members on board. The captain had retired to his cabin that night and left an inexperienced seaman at the helm in his place. A rescue effort ensued amid high winds and 10-foot, 3 meters high waves. Luckily, everyone survived, and only one passenger suffered minor injuries to their hand. The Mandalay remained above water long enough for looters to take whatever valuables they could get their hands on, though. Today, it sits at the bottom of Long Reef in Biscayne National Park. It's one of at least 44 wrecks found throughout the park and is located in shallow, clear waters. It now serves as a popular snorkeling and scuba diving destination. Have you ever been scuba diving? Tell us about it in the comments and hit subscribe while you're at it. Number 6. SS Cotopaxi. The 253-foot-long, 77 meters bulk carrier SS Cotopaxi was created after World War I as part of a US-funded emergency shipbuilding program. It somehow vanished, though, during a brutal tropical storm in 1925 after leaving South Carolina and heading towards Havana, leading many to believe that it most likely came to rest on the seafloor somewhere inside the infamous Bermuda Triangle. The crew tried to radio for help, but all 32 men aboard went down with the ship. The Cotopaxi was rediscovered 40 miles, 64.4 kilometers off the Jacksonville, Florida coast in the 1980s, but experts only confirmed its true identity in 2020 after spending many years analyzing ship records. As it turned out, the wreck was not in the Bermuda Triangle at all, despite what so many had believed. The crew members' heartbroken families filed a lawsuit over their loved ones' disappearances. They convinced the Cotopaxi's carpenter to testify in the case, claiming that broken hatch covers that were used to cover coal could have led the vessel to leak and sink during the storm. It also came to light that the crew's distress calls had been picked up in Jacksonville, not far from where the ship was later found. If nothing else, the discovery helps eliminate any far-flung theories about the Cotopaxi being sucked into the bottomless vortex the Bermuda Triangle has led itself to be. Number 5. Centuries-old whaling ship. In early 2022, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA, released fascinating footage of a 200-year-old whaling ship that was found during a deep-sea dive off the Gulf of Mexico. The expedition's purpose was just to test the agency's remotely operated vehicles and mapping systems, but finding a shipwreck was an unexpected bonus. Almost the entirety of the wooden vessel had disintegrated, according to the NOAA crew that found it, but its anchor was clearly visible and looked like it had been snapped in half. Experts believe the ship likely dates back to sometime between 1800 and 1840. Whale hunting was a lucrative industry during that period. Off the Florida coast, it's likely that the hunters were after right whales, which were once abundant in Gulf waters. Hunting whales unfortunately got so popular that humans nearly wiped some whale species out of existence, and it's now illegal in most countries, including the United States. Number 4. The Caroline Eddy. In late 2020, heavy cyclones and winds exposed an unidentified wooden hull along Crescent Beach in St. Augustine. Archaeologists from the Lighthouse Archaeological Maritime Program, LAMP, analyzed what little was left of the wreck and determined the vessel was most likely a 19th century merchant ship and was probably built in either the US, Canada, or Britain. They've since tentatively identified it as the Caroline Eddy, a merchant brigantine built in Maine back in 1862 as a Union supply ship during the Civil War. Researchers uncovered detailed historical documents about the vessel and found that the sources seemed to match up with the wreck. According to the paperwork, the Caroline Eddy left Fernandina Beach for Philadelphia in 1880 with a cargo load of lumber. The crew didn't realize it at the time, but they sailed directly into a hurricane and were toppled by a huge wave. While experts can't be positive that the decaying wooden hull belongs to the Caroline Eddy for certain, it's the most believable answer. After examining the wreck, they reburied it for the sake of preservation. Number 3. SS Regina. The 247-foot-long, 75 meters SS Regina was made in Ireland in 1904 during an increased demand for molasses. She hauled the sweet substance for over 35 years before meeting her ill-fated end in 1940. Packed with over 350,000 gallons, 1,324,894.12 liters of molasses, the Regina left Cuba heading towards Louisiana at the mercy of a tugboat on March the 5th. 2 days later, an unforgiving cold front swept through Mexico's Gulf, bringing gale-force winds and 8 to 12 foot, 2.4 to 3.7 meters, waves along with it. The tugboat's tow line ended up snapping, and the Regina began drifting helplessly toward the shore. She ran aground on a sandbar off Bradenton Beach, leaving her 8-man crew stranded. Locals spotted the ship and launched a rescue effort, battling choppy waters to get to the boat and save everyone that was still alive. By the time rescuers reached the Regina, one man had jumped off and tried swimming to shore, losing his life in the process. Today, the wreck is one of Florida's most popular diving spots. Number 2. Henrietta Marie. Built in France sometime during the 17th century, the Henrietta Marie was a slave ship that carried captive Africans to the West Indies for labor. It fell into English hands, likely as a war prize, and made at least 2 trips as part of the Atlantic slave trade. During its first voyage from 1697 to 1698, the vessel carried at least 200 African captives to Barbados, where they were sold into slavery. A year later, the Henrietta Marie dropped 191 captive humans off in Jamaica and loaded cargo full of sugar, cotton, dyewoods, and ginger on board to take back to England. To avoid crossing paths with pirates that were known to lurk between Cuba and the Dominican Republic, the captain sailed the ship around the western side of Cuba. The Henrietta Marie wrecked about 35 miles, 56 kilometers west of Key West, near the Marquesas Keys. No one survived, and for nearly 300 years the ship's fate remained a mystery to record keepers. A diver recovered the wreck in 1972 and found shackles along with other artifacts indicating that it was once a slave ship. After realizing it likely didn't have any treasure, the diver reburied the artifacts. The wreck was excavated during the 80s and was later identified as the Henrietta Marie when a bell bearing an inscription of the ship's name and the year 1699 was found. Explorers also uncovered 2 cauldrons that were most likely used to prepare meals for the crew and slaves. In 1993, the National Association of Black Scuba Divers placed a memorial plaque at the wreck site, dedicated to the captive Africans who were forced to leave their lives and country behind while enduring the unimaginable suffering that came with being sold into slavery. Number 1. The City of Washington. Launched in 1877, the American-built vessel called the City of Washington was an iron-hulled merchant steamer that transported passengers and cargo between New York, Mexico, and Cuba. On the night of February 15, 1898, the USS Maine exploded in Havana Harbor, where it was being kept to protect US interests during a deteriorating relationship with Spain at the time. This was the final straw, setting the Spanish-American War in motion. At the time, the City of Washington was moored close by and suffered only minor damages, but was still able to participate in the rescue of the Maine survivors by providing lifeboats and allowing the use of its dining area as a hospital. During the war, the vessel transported troops, then went back to hauling passengers and cargo until getting taken out of service and laid up in Brooklyn in 1908. In 1911, the ship was once again converted, this time into a coal-transporting barge. The City of Washington's career finally came to an end in 1917 when it ran aground with another barge and tugboat on a shallow reef near Key Largo. The other two vessels were raised, but the City of Washington broke apart during the accident and sank underwater. Today, it's one of the most popular dive sites in the Florida Keys and has been designated as part of the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary's Shipwreck Trail. Thanks for watching. Which one of these wrecks would you like to visit? Tell us in the comments and remember to subscribe. See you soon. Bye.